Hello, I'm Dave from DinoPC, and this is the T-Rex. So this is the T-Rex, pretty much the most ultimate computer that we make here at DinoPC. Inside, it's got a 5960X, 16 gigabytes of RAM. I think I stole some for another project. It's also got a fully water-cooled GPU. Oh, actually 3 GPUs, and they're 3 Titan X's. Water-cooled CPU and PCIe Express SSD. Basically, it's the ultimate in computing that we build here. The price of this monster is £9,500. After a recent price drop, you can get this bad boy. I'd almost say it is a bargain for what it is. However, something interesting has launched at Intel, the brand new broadwell-e CPUs. We've got the i7-6950X, which is a 10-core CPU that we're going to be putting in this bad boy against the old 5960X in a little comparison test in a moment. They also released the i7-6900K, the i7-6850K, and the i7-6800K. So the i7-6800 has 6 cores with 12 threads and 15 megabytes of cache. The 6850, however, has exactly the same specs, except the clock speed is 0.2 gigahertz higher. The 6900 is 3.2 gigahertz with 8 cores and 12 threads with 20 megabytes of cache, and the all-powerful 6950 comes with 10 cores, 20 threads, and 3.0 gigahertz of clock speed and 25 megabytes of cache. With the 6950, the 6900 and the 6850, you get 40 PCIe lanes. But with the 6800, you only get 28 PCIe lanes. You of course get Intel's Turbo Boost 2 technology, things like hyperthreading, obviously, support for overclocking with all models, integrated memory, and of course those 40 PCIe lanes. The socket is of course LGA 2011 revision 3. And 140 watt TDP. And of course there is only one compatible board, and that is the X99 chipset. So we've got all of that extra power, which is obviously great. But what does it mean in real world terms? Well, this is our DinoPC Ultimate T-Rex of awesomeness. And inside of it, we've got a 5960X, the previous generation for this chipset of Intel CPUs. What we're gonna do with it is take readings from the 5960X overclocked and at standard clock, and we're going to test it in a variety of tests and see which is better. The 10 core, which is the top of the range that you can get from the new Intel chipset, or the best of the last world, the 5960X, which is better? Let's find out. Now, of course, what you may not realize is that having more cores doesn't necessarily mean more power. The more cores you have, the less frequency you can have. For example, you can clock a 4-core with hyperthreading CPU a lot higher than you're going to be able to clock a 10-core. However, we do have an amazing liquid cooling system in this bad boy. So why don't we find out exactly how much we can overclock the new CPUs and how much performance gain or loss do you get from these new CPUs? Because we can. Why not? So this is the best of Haswell. This is our T-Rex as it comes standard if you were to buy it today. An overclock of 4.6 gigahertz on the best that Haswell can offer, this 5960X, which is pretty damn amazing. This of course is running on the 22 nanometer chip process. The new ones are running on 14 nanometer. Weirdly, the first thing we're actually going to run is a graphics test. And here's why. The 3 Titan X's that come inside here are extremely overclocked. Unigine Valley might even be being held back by the processor. So I wonder if we up the amount of cores, will the processor be able to get a slightly better frame rate? So let's run the benchmark. Cool but impractical, by the way. I would never ever recommend putting 3 Titan X's in a system at home unless you're going to be doing some insane rendering or something like that. This is definitely for the massively high-grade enthusiast kind of people that are out there. The reason why I wouldn't recommend it is 3-way SLI does have its downfalls. Micro stuttering, jittering, all these kind of things that you get. It's just a fact that you're going to get these with 3-way SLI and sometimes even 2-way SLI. Okay, so we've got an FPS score of 152, an overall score of 6,359, a minimum FPS of 43.3, and a maximum FPS of 234.4. Great. So, let's move on to the CPU tests. We're going to keep it simple. I think we're just going to do one CPU test and one GPU test and see if things change. So we're going to run Cinebench. This is Cinebench. What it does is it simply renders an image using the CPU only, and we're going to do a multi-CPU render and a single CPU render, and we're going to compare the two once it's finished. We've got a score there of 1,798. Now it's time to run the single CPU test. Okay, so when we are using the single core, we have managed to get a mark of 177. So that's pretty cool, but we're going to take it back to standard clock now and do the standard clock test so that we can get a fair comparison for when we put in the 6950X. So here we are, we have taken the clock speed back to the normal clock speed for the Haswell 5960X, and we go into unit value. We've already done the benchmark, and already we can see that the frames per second on average is a lot lower at 111.3. The score is 4,656, which is a lot lower than the 6,000 we were getting before. The minimum FPS is 30.8, and the max FPS didn't even top out over 200 at 185.5. This is still not a bad score. By all means, it's an amazing score. If your computer's pushing this out, you should be very, very proud. But it's not the score we got before with the chip overclocked, which means it does make a difference in this test. Time for Cinebench. How does the ordinary clock compare to our overclock? Well, already I can tell you that it is going quite a bit slower, just by looking at it right now. So it's interesting to see how much slower and how much the overclocking this kind of beast can get you. So before we got a score of 1,795, I believe. Now we're getting a score of 1,365. So the score here is really obvious. If you get one of these CPUs and you have the ability to overclock it, for God's sake, definitely overclock it. Ah, fantastic. We've just finished the benchmark. So a single core CPU here, we're running at 125 CB. The other one was around 170. So it's clear that overclocking does make a difference, but that's not what we're really interested in. We kind of already know that overclocking, of course, makes a difference. But how is it going to fare against our brand new i7 6950X? Let's get it in here and let's find out. So, as you may notice, it's actually been a week. I've actually been on holiday, but we've finally got the 6950X inside the T-Rex. But what should be noted is that we're now running the 10-core 6950X at 4.398, so basically 4.4 megahertz. We were unable to get it above 4.4 and be able to successfully boot Windows. With a bit of tinkering, we could probably get up to 4.5, maybe 4.6 at a push, which would have been awesome. Unfortunately, our master engineer didn't have time today to do that, but maybe we'll do that in a future video. So we got a nice stable clock at 4.4 megahertz. So we have an FPS score of 152.3, a total score of 6,372, a minimum FPS of 43.1, and a max FPS of 232, which is very interesting. We'll see some graphs in just a moment, but let's go and do the CPU test first. So we got a score of 2,255, which is obviously going to be better. It was obviously going to be better than the 5960X. So for the single core performance, we've got a score of 182, which is marginally higher than the 5960X, but the interesting bit's about to happen because we're about to dial back the overclock to standard settings, and then we're going to put it all in the graph for you so you can all understand. So let's do that now. Well, the results clearly speak for themselves. We got an FPS score of 126 on average, total score of 5,273, over 1,000 score less, minimum FPS of 36.9, and a maximum FPS of 193.3. Which is kind of what we were expecting, to be honest. So the standard clock then for Cinebench. We are looking at 1,865. So the single core performance, 153, which scales perfectly to what we've seen before, which is perfect. But let's put that into a graph, put all of these tests into a graph, and find out exactly what everything looks like. So, the 5960X versus the 6950X. Well, the 6950X came out on top. While it's overclocked, we didn't really see any performance gained in our graphics test. When they were both a standard clock, there was a clear winner there, which was the 6950X. But if you're going to have one of these, you're most likely going to overclock it anyway. So it's not as if you're going to be ever having it at standard clock. Always overclock these CPUs because they're brilliant when they are. In terms of things like Cinebench and CPU intensive tasks, the 6950X is king. Like, king. The only way you're going to be getting better performance out of the CPU is if you decide to go to Xeons, and then we're talking crazy stuff. You're probably working on something amazing to do with Pixar if you're starting to get into Xeon territory, to be honest. There is, of course, one downside, as ever with high-end hardware. The 6950X, and there is no real simple way of putting this, is $1,723, which makes it, as near as makes no difference, £1,200. Well, £1,183 in today's money, but one suspects that the exact conversion isn't exactly going to be that. I suspect you'll be paying around 1,250 personally, but if you do an exact conversion, you're going about £1,200. Either way, it is an expensive piece of kit. Is it worth it? That is up for you guys to decide. What could you buy with £1,200? Well, you could buy a GTX 1080 and an i7 and a boot SSD and a fairly nice case and quite a bit of RAM too. So you guys make the decision. Is the 6950X worth it? Let us know in the comment section below. I've been David for DinoPC, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.